Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome, folks. I'm so glad that folks are rolling in on this snowy day. I'm glad we have Zoom to be able to pivot to our virtual option. My name is Liv Cook. I coordinate the Public School Strong campaign for Tennessee with SOCM and Tennessee for All. I'm so glad to be joining y'all as we have this community forum to talk about the upcoming House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1 voucher legislation and figure out what we can do together to support our public schools. So again, as you're coming in, if you want to drop your name and how you're connected to your local schools in the chat, just so we know who's in the room. I'm
Oh,
asking,
wait. Okay. Dr. Holman has joined us now.
okay,
Good. Yeah.
great. If you want to add a spotlight, that would be wonderful.
I'm not sure how to do
Again,
that.
if you hit those three little dots at the top, and then there should be
Oh,
an add
gotcha.
spotlight option.
Okay.
And so for folks that are coming in, if you will please mute your microphone, that just helps us be able to fully listen to our speakers during the forum session. There will be a chance to ask questions and feel free to use the chat to connect. Also, just for a values agreement, we, Public School Strong, believe that every child in Tennessee should have access to a high quality public education that is equitable, safe, and fully funded, regardless of race, class, background, ability, or zip code. So those are the values we're bringing with us this morning. So a little bit about who we are. So SOCM stands for Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment. We've been around for about 52 years. We are a grassroots organizing organization committed to empowering local level leaders to create the change they want to see in their communities. We are also part of a coalition called Tennessee for All, which is a community of faith, community, and labor organizations from Maryville to Memphis who are committed to the same thing, to shifting the balance of power in Tennessee so that we can build the communities we deserve. Public School Strong is a campaign of SOCM and Tennessee for All, where we are fighting to win honest, equitable, safe, and fully funded public schools. And this is a campaign that is led by ordinary folks like you. Parents, educators, and neighbors from across the state attend their school board meetings, come up with strategic plans together, and fight to win the fully funded schools they want to see. And then they connect together across the state to make statewide impact. Last year, our big win was that we were able to defeat the voucher scam last year, and we're fighting to do the same thing this year. So before we hear from our local experts, I'm going to offer just a little, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and offer a little bit of context for what we're seeing in Tennessee. So what Tennessee is proposing is a universal ESA program. So education savings accounts are a type of school voucher program that places public funding in an account for parents to use for educational expenses or things that can be justified for educational expenses. In Tennessee, we saw that this program started in 2015 as a program specifically for students with disabilities. So if a family with a child that has a disability is not getting their needs met or for some reason wants to seek out a private option, the state then subsidized a voucher for them. What is not always as well known, however, is that students who with disabilities who receive a voucher have to give up their federal protections in order to receive it. So this child no longer has protections around discipline or an IEP or other things that they would get through a public education. But even before 2015, it's important to acknowledge that vouchers have a longer history than that. The roots of vouchers are actually rooted in some early anti-integration movements following the passing of Brown versus Board of Education. And we've continued to see across the country where voucher programs are alive and well, is that this continues to segregate our communities across the lines of race and class and ability. Fast forward to 2019, Tennessee launches an ESA pilot program in Memphis and Nashville. We saw there was actually a pretty split vote there, so it was not nearly as it's not nearly as popular as some folks are trying to make it seem. And in 2020, this pilot program was met with a lawsuit from Nashville and Shelby County governments and parents. In 2023, vouchers expanded to Hamilton County, but what we've seen are reports that the scores that are coming out from this pilot program are proving that students that receive vouchers actually don't perform better than their public school counterparts. And then in 2024, that's when Governor Lee announced that he wants to open this up to be a universal voucher program called the Education Freedom Scholarship Act. But thanks to people power across the state, this was not passed. It got stalled in the Finance Committee. And a lot of that was due to the work of ordinary folks across the state. If you see down here in the bottom left-hand corner, over 72 school boards, county commissions, and city councils passed resolutions opposing Governor Lee's voucher bill. And so there are some districts that are still renewing their resolutions across the state for this iteration of the bill, but you can see that it is widely unpopular looking at this map. So I'm going to let our experts talk more deeply about the impacts of this bill, but just to very briefly go over what makes House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 a little bit different is that there are different enticements attached to this bill. So last year, what we saw is that the governor, the Senate, and the House all had very different ideas of what this voucher program should look like. The Senate and the governor's idea was very similar. The House bill, it was a lot harder to try to get everyone on the same page on what it would take to pass vouchers. And so what we wound up with was this 35-page document that was filled with different enticements and things like that to try to win over folks who would otherwise vote no. This year, the bill that they've presented is identical in the House and the Senate, but it still includes some of these enticements. So the general aspects of the bill are the same, about a $7,000 voucher for anyone who is eligible to attend a public school, excluding homeschooling students. And they've allotted $140 million for vouchers in the first year. Some things that they've added on to this is that this voucher bill will prioritize students with disabilities and families that are at or below 300% the level that you would need to qualify for free and reduced lunch. But what we're finding is that for some families, that looks like $115,000 a year, which is exactly low income like what they're claiming. And then after they reach that threshold, they want it to be universally eligible and expand it each year that the program is successful. They've also attached a $2,000 one-time teacher bonus to this bill. I used to be an educator. I know that that $2,000 doesn't exactly mean a hill of beans, especially now when we've got teachers that maybe aren't making enough to buy a house right now. Additionally, they've attached some infrastructure funding clause that says that Tennessee can use the money that we make from sports gambling to fund infrastructure needs. What's particularly insulting about this is that it prioritizes rural and sparse districts and districts that have been impacted by emergencies. So our neighbors up in Northeast Tennessee that have been impacted by Hurricane Helene, they are now saying that you can have the funding to fix your schools, but you have to take vouchers, which we know will devastate our public schools. And this funding really, even if they were to give it to us, really isn't enough to exactly meet the needs of those districts. There's also an unclear hold harmless clause that says that if a district loses enrollment, therefore losing funding due to vouchers, that the state will fill in the gaps. Depending on which legislator you talk to, it's unclear whether that's in perpetuity, whether it's 1 year to the next, whether it's just in the first year. And again, there raises that question of if we can fund two public school systems, why do we not just take our public school system that we have and fund it really well where everyone has access? And the last point I'm going to make about one of the enticements they've thrown in is this idea around accountability, that students who receive vouchers will have to take a test like public school students. However, in the bill, it's not clear what that test will be. It says TCAP or a nationally normed test for their grade level. Additionally, these private school voucher recipients will not likely be held to the same punitive accountability measures that public school students are. So for example, a third grader who maybe doesn't perform proficient on their test will likely not be held to the same retention standards that is required by the state for public school students. So with that, I will stop there because we've got some amazing speakers that are here that are going to have a conversation around what this looks like in your county, their thoughts on how this can harm our public schools. After that, we will have an opportunity for folks who are watching to ask some questions. So you can drop those in the chat, but I will pass it over to Helen to facilitate this conversation. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, y'all. Okay, So we have some of our school board members and county commissioners here. We have Sandy Schultz, Sarah Leichty, Sarah Marhevsky, Cleijo Walker, um, and then we have our director of schools, Dr. Holman, and we have Ken Bishop, who is with the TEA, the Tennessee Education Association, and we have three of our county commissioners, Chris Hawkersmith, who can't get his camera to work, but that's fine. We know he's here with us, and Bruce MacMillan and Spike Hosch. So thank you all so much for coming. I know it's hard to get out on, I mean, do things on a Saturday. So I have 6 questions for our panelists, and then, like I said, we'll open it up to all of you to ask questions. So my first question, and whoever of you all feels the most, whoever wants to answer this question, please do. How will it affect our public schools here in Franklin County fiscally? I mean, just thinking about it in my own head, if you lose 7,500 per student and you lose 4 or 5 students, that's almost a teacher's salary that our public schools are losing. So who would like to answer the question of how it's going to affect our public schools fiscally if this voucher scheme is enacted? Okay, Sarah, so just unmute yourself.
All right. So hi, if you don't know me, I'm Sarah Marhevsky. I'm a member of the school board. I'm also our legislative liaison for the district. I'm sure that other people will also want to chime in on this one, but let me, and maybe Dr. Holman will want to kick in if I misspeak, but for those of you who don't know, we switched to a new funding formula for education in the last couple of years. It's called TISA, T-I-S-A. And basically, part of how this works is a school district gets $7,075 per pupil. So it doesn't pay for a certain number of teachers. It doesn't pay for a certain number of buildings. There's money that follows each student. So the amount of money a school district gets can go up or down per year based on how many students are enrolled. And so sort of as Helen was saying, if 10 students leave, you're not going to need fewer teachers, you're not going to have fewer schools, you're not going to run fewer programs, but you're going to be missing that $70,000 plus. And again, you can see how as the numbers go up, you're still going to need the same number of schools and same number of teachers because it's not going to be kids from all the same schools. So basically, you're going to have to run all the same things with less money. So that's one thing. So the base funding per pupil is $70.75 for this year. And so this bill does a couple of things. So our school district has to cover roughly 30% of that per pupil. The county commission has to vote to approve our budget every year that will help cover our portion to continue the maintenance of effort. So right now, that means something like the county has to chip in something around $1,768 per student who's in a county public school. Mm-hmm. With this bill, however, the state will send all $70.75 to the private school of a person's choice. So basically, the private schools will get more from the state than the public schools get from the state, which is one of the problems. On top of once that starts happening, then you still have to make do with less coming in. There was talk of the eligibility. And so they've set aside this $144 million they left it set aside from last year. So again, as Liv said, the student's annual household income can't exceed 300% of the amount required for the student to qualify for free or reduced lunch. However, that amount for a family of 4 to qualify for sort of the financial need part, it is equivalent to roughly $173,000. So if you make under $173,000 as a family of 4, you can qualify for sort of the financial need 10,000 slots. And so again, sort of in terms of money and the district and what this is going towards, those are a couple of the issues. I have some other things that go with other issues, but I'll stop with some of the financial piece from there and let someone else chime in. Thanks.
And Sarah, to your point, that first 10,000 is based on need, basically, is what they're calling it. But there is an additional 10,000 that doesn't have any type of standards that they have to meet in order to receive that scholarship.
That's right. So this isn't necessarily something that's addressing need for families that can't pay for these things themselves.
Correct.
And to add to that, ladies, after the first year, there is no restrictions whatsoever after the first year.
Good morning.
And amount increases per year too. They'll add extra slots, so the budget will grow, because right now if they do this, it'll be something like $142 million, but it's set to it could increase every year. So again, drawing more students, taking more money.
And to get down to some other numbers that you were talking about with that $173,000 poverty line, that's a 555% of national poverty in the state of Tennessee.
Goodness. Okay, so the upshot is it's going to drain our public schools. It's going to drain our public schools. I mean, that's pretty much the upshot of it. Okay, let's move on.
I'd like to add something too, real quick. I think Dr. Holman did too. Want to say something?
Yeah, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So I did want to add to what of our board members, what they've also said, as well as Mr. Bishop, that when we're looking at the ramifications that this could most definitely have on public education, I think it's important for us to understand that with the current monies that we do receive from the State Department, which is TISA funding, that we, as any local county, of those funds, it's allocated $7,075. Well, let me help individuals understand that that was an increase just last year in a difference of $250 because it was $6,860. And so that difference was stated to us to make up for the governor's initiative to get our teachers' salaries up to par. And so when you see that difference, we were only really getting $150 per student's change on our TISA formula for this year. The other thing to bring to light is understanding that we as school districts, our TISA funding is based on the numbers from the previous year. And so therefore, when we are going through budget season, we are operating off of dollars of children that we serviced the previous year, not the children that we're servicing the current year. And so therefore, with that, when you are budgeting and setting time for that, TISA, the State Department, is then going to decide the amounts of dollars that you're going to receive based on the reporting periods from the previous year. What one has to then understand is that though that be the case, at the beginning of the school year, we may start off with 100 more students than we ended with the previous year. However, those children, we are not receiving funding for those additional children, but yet have to make the necessary employment measures to provide education for those children. What's interesting to note is then that the State Department with this scholarship, whatever they want to call it, if we as public education are having to operate off of monies from the previous year, it's quite interesting to me that private schools are going to get their monies up front based on the children that are enrolling for that current year.
I think one important thing to also add on top of all this is that public schools have to meet students wherever they are. So if they have special needs, or if they have need a translator, if they have an IEP, whereas private schools don't. So think about long term, besides just the funds moving away from public schools will be left with higher costs per student in terms of educating. And so it's going to make it harder and harder for public schools to meet the needs of those students who will be left behind by private schools.
All right, well, that actually takes us, Spike, right into our next question, which is how will this voucher scheme affect children and families with disabilities? So Spike just addressed some of that, but if anyone else would like to add how it's going to affect students in the public school system who have disabilities.
Well, I think it's going to not only just children with disabilities. Here's what you're going to see with the in the event this scholarship or Freedom Act or whatever they want to, is going to pass. You're looking at, and I appreciate at the very beginning the young lady that opened up. It brings us back to technically a modern day segregation in so much of that of children with academic abilities as well as children with disabilities, because we as public education, with free appropriate public education, we accept every single individual in schools, and must, and rightfully so. However, those private institutions can truly select who they want to let in and who they choose not to let in. And so when you start thinking in that regard alone, it would be interesting to see if that so be the case, what type of data, and we can get into data in a little bit. I'm not sure if that's a part of your questions or not, what that's going to look like, because I would speak openly to say, I don't believe that you're going to have a substantial number of private schools who are going to be very quick to take all of the students that would fall in many different subgroup categories.
And Dr. Holman, to follow up on that, I see that two ways. As far as in my own family, I have a special needs child and one that is an Excel student. So that means one of my students would be eligible to accept this voucher system if we so chose to, and then one student that I know that they would not accept because they do not have to accept students with disabilities, and they're not going to want to accept students once they find out the amount of resources and monies that it takes for some of these students. And I can speak for that personally with my own children. Again, one being Excel and one being a special needs student with different abilities, not necessarily a disability, but that could go either way. And there's no accountability there for them, where it is for public schools. Like you said, we educate everyone, regardless of background or ability.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
So Liv showed a map of districts that passed resolutions. We passed a resolution about this version of the Education Freedom Act. They took out the word scholarship. I like to think it's because they really didn't want us focusing on the amount of money this is going to take. So in our resolution, part of what we note is that in our district, which has 4,732 students, 747 of them, so almost 16%, are students with disabilities, just to give some context for our own district. And then if we kind of jump to what they were referring to, in the bill itself, it says a recipient does not retain the right to receive special education and related services from the LEA, so from the school district in which the recipient resides, through an individual IEP program. So if they're going to a private school, like you lose your services in the district. And then, so it says in the bill, parents should be free to choose the school that best fits the educational needs of their specific child. So again, if you look at that, you're like, as a parent, you might say, wow, that's great. Like, I think my student would really thrive in this kind of environment. But in the bill, it also says private schools that enroll recipients must have the maximum freedom to provide for the educational needs of recipients without governmental control. A private school that enrolls recipients is not required to alter its creed, practices, admission policies, hiring policies, or curriculum in order to accept recipients. And so, again, whether you're talking special education or various other kinds of groups, part of what you see here is that basically this Education Freedom Act is heavily favoring private schools and kind of penalizing the public schools. in that we don't get the freedom to set our own curriculum. We have to abide by the state testing and those kinds of things. We're happy to take everyone. We're public school. It's what we do. It's a gift to be able to educate all of our students and make everyone feel welcome. And so again, you can see the disparity between how this policy will treat the two kinds of schools and students.
All right. Well, so yes, and so then it seems like the public schools will have a disproportionately larger amount of special needs students in them than they had before. Okay, if anyone doesn't, if y'all are done addressing that question, we will move on to the next one, and that is, how is it going to, or sorry, what have y'all seen anecdotally that has happened in other states that have adopted vouchers? Does anyone want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I have done, I pulled together a little bit of information. It honestly would be overwhelming in the time allotted, but I'm looking at some of the key states that have been in the news recently. One that comes to mind is Arizona, and I'll just read from a publication. Yet in a lesson for other states, Arizona's voucher experiment has since precipitated a budget meltdown. This state this year faced a $1.4 billion budget shortfall, much of which was the result of the new voucher spending. A local nonpartisan fiscal and economic policy think tank, which was the Grand Canyon Institute, last fiscal year alone, the price tag of universal vouchers in Arizona skyrocketed from an original official estimate of just $65 million to roughly $332 million. And they expect another $429 million increase this year. The result has been that they've had to make cuts into some critical state programs and projects. And these cuts are felt by every Arizonian who may or may not have school-aged children. One that I think is worth mentioning is among funding slash was a $333 million appropriation for water infrastructure projects in a state where water scarcity will shape the future. I'll move on from Arizona to, let's see who else I have here. Indiana. Indiana has been at the forefront of a lot of things. They've had a voucher program since 2011. In 22-23, they expanded the program. And originally, there was a $40,000 a year income level to qualify for an Indiana voucher. It has now expanded to an income level of $222,000 a year for families. 36% of the new state taxes for the K-12 education is directed to private schools in Indiana now, which educate only 7% of the student population in that state. That leaves 64% of funds for 93% of the students. And again, they started like we started, by sampling, by just opening in certain districts, and then they've expanded. In Utah, the voucher program in 2023 was worth $8,000 per current pupil. They first appropriated $42.5 million to support this program. It's grown to $150 million in the last year. Arkansas, their 2023 educational free account, it's worth noting that 95% of the recipients did not attend a public school in the year prior to receiving the vouchers. 30% of the recipients of this attend just 7 schools. So you can do 30% of the money they spend and find out what's going to just 7 schools. Colorado, which struggles to fund public ed, at the state level as required, and their constituents are pushing back on it. And I think also in the last election in November, Kentucky voters were given the option to vote on this and turned it down. They voted in every state, in every county, and it was rejected in every county. Nebraska repealed the program, which was a public funds through tax credits. 57% of the voters in every county in Nebraska voted to shut that program down or repeal it. And Colorado, who would need to amend their constitution to institute it, defeated the effort to amend the Colorado state constitution. And just as a note, this is not about limiting choice. It's about protecting taxpayers and upholding our civic commitment to public ed. It's not about choice. It's about upholding our commitment and taking care of our students. One other one I'll mention, I think Sarah said the other day, what's going on in North Carolina. I did not dig it all out, but what I do know now, the maximum income guideline in 24-25 for a family of four is $260,000 a year in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, that is a tier 3 award, and they have it broken down by number of people in the household. But they're having a tier 4 award, which says you don't have to tell us how much you make, or you can make above what we're saying is the maximum. We're still going to give you approximately $3,400 a year to pay for private schools. So it's what's going on around us, I don't think sends a positive message to the taxpayers of Tennessee.
Yeah. So to summarize, we're seeing families who are quite well off getting assistance, who probably really don't need it.
In every state I researched, yes.
Right. So it's helping the rich at the expense of the poor.
The other thing that it's doing is growing by gangbusters from the original proposal. And that's the crystal ball part for Tennessee that we simply don't have. Right. We can only look at our neighbors to see what's happened there.
And to follow up with what Ms. Sarah said, as far as TEA is concerned, this is, when she's talking about taxpayers and us doing our due diligence, this is an $861.9 million increase in taxpayer cost over the first 5 years of this implementation.
Is that for Tennessee, Mr. Bishop?
Yes, ma'am. That is for Tennessee. $861.9 million in new cost for Tennessee taxpayers in the first 5 years.
And that's a projected figure.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's probably projected because
it is a projected.
They're supposed to add, if all of the scholarships are taken, they're supposed to add 5,000 additional ones each year to what is already in existence. So that's going to drive the cost up.
All right. So are we all done with this topic? Are we ready to move on? Okay. So our next question is, how will the voucher program be inaccessible to lower income families or to rural families? And I'll just use one little example for here. For us is the only if St. Andrews is the nearby private school and the only one nearby, really, it's $15,000 a year. So if you're getting $7,500 or so from the state, you still have to come up with roughly $8,000. So the vouchers would only help a family that already has $8,000 laying around to send their kid to the private school. So there are very few low-income families who could even take advantage of the voucher if that were their choice. And then rural families, a lot of them rely on the bus, and these private schools, voucher schools, will not provide bus service. So that's just one little example I'm seeing. But what do y'all have to add to that? How is this voucher scheme inaccessible to a lower income or rural family? any of y'all would like to take that?
I'm not going to add to that, but I would like to say for those people who have chosen St. Andrews and are paying that tuition, that voucher will just be extra money in their pockets. Is that reasonable to conclude? Which to me is troubling when our public education has never been fully funded in the state of Tennessee, and certainly we could use additional monies to help all the children.
And I'll just add very quickly, some of the numbers we're seeing in Arizona, Florida, other programs, it's between 70 to 80% of these voucher recipients, they have never attended public schools. They were already enrolled in private schools, already could afford it. So really what we're talking about with this voucher is it's a subsidy for those families.
And according to our TEA information, 95% of the Arkansas initiative, those were families that were already in the private school sector. So that was money that they actually pocketed, to be, lack of better terms, because they were already paying the tuition for their student to go to a private school. And then when this voucher system went in effect with them in Arkansas, again, 95%, according to TEA, were already in the school system or a private school system rather than the public school system.
Right
So
now,
I agree with Ms. Sarah.
Right now, don't we just have two schools that could be voucher schools? Swanee and WCA.
CA.
But what's to keep all these other schools from popping up? We may have schools pop up all over the county that, and that's going to take more of our students too when that happens. And that's just one thing I see that I'm kind of afraid of is we'll just have all these little fly-by-night schools pop up and kids will end up going to them too.
Ms. Schultz, I agree with you, not only as a professional, but as a parent. I can see business advocates coming in going, oh, we only have two in this particular county. What's to say that we won't have 5 or 6 businesses, private businesses, do this, and then before you know it, you've got 7 or 8, 10 or 12. And then there goes our money for public school funding, as you well know.
Absolutely. I think it's going to do away with public education as we see it today, if this happens.
And these schools popping up like mushrooms, they will have probably no accountability. Their teachers will not have to be certified. Like I know you, Mr. Bishop, and Ben have been Ayers. Y'all had to go through years of training and schooling, and these schools that are popping up like mushrooms, they probably have very few requirements of their teachers.
I think they can even hire uncertified teachers.
Oh yeah,
they don't have to be. I mean, they pretty much do. Make their own curriculums at time and kind of hire who they want to hire. And I just think they don't understand that kids need to be held to a certain standard, and that standard may not be in these voucher schools.
Oh yeah, I mean,
no accountability.
No offense to St. Andrews, but they hire kids straight out of college, 21 years old, to teach math, and my kids got horrible math educations because they had those students. Anyway, okay, so
I'm gonna tack on one thing that's sort of tangentially related to. I think someone mentioned busing, and I think that's important to point out too. So even though you might be getting this money to put towards your school, it doesn't give you transportation. The hours may not align. You can't just put your kid on the bus and have them get there. So you also have to be able to transport them, which doesn't work for all families either. And just a quick note about teachers as well. So in the public schools, our teachers have retirement benefits. They have days off and these kinds of things. And private schools may offer those benefits, but they may not offer benefits. They don't have to abide by the same public school pay scale. And so it's also, so just even for sort of the well-being of employees, public school employees have more protections in place than private school employees as well. So there's certainly, we care about the students as our primary thing, but also, I mean, we look out for our teachers, for our employees. They're vital parts of our system. And again, they wouldn't have the same protections working for private schools in many cases.
All right, sorry, I'm just thinking about time. We just need to kind of move on, but those are very good points. All right, so the next question is, and probably Mr. Holman could answer this, or any of y'all. How could this voucher money be used otherwise? Like, imagine if the public school system were just given all this voucher money. What could y'all do?
Going back to some statements that were said earlier, first of all, public education has never been funded completely. And with the ever increasing mandates that our teachers are pressed with, there are multiple channels in which how we can educate children. Here's what the public must understand, that children today versus children 15, even 10 years ago, are continuing to change. They're continuing to change because of the many things that they are having to go through. When we start looking at our state standards, when we start looking at the accountability piece that is impressed upon public education, given we had the appropriate funding, then you could put the additional layers of support in schools for children. When we think about based on what legislation says that we have to do in schools, and this is why there's such a difference in public education and private education, the accountability piece all by itself. And so when we in public education are trying to adhere to all of the stated mandates that we have to go through, whether it be high dosage, low ratio tutoring, whether it be meeting behavioral needs of children, and those are everly increasing. And those are the very children that are not going to be, or I'm not going to say not going to be, but will be minimal to be admitted to these private areas, to these private schools. And so when you think about going back to the very beginning, the insult to injury, to even remotely put as a part of the attachment that you want to offer teachers a $2,000 incentive, how disgraceful it is for that to even come out of the mouths of individuals, because that by itself speaks to how we, or how they as a state, value public education. Our everyday mandates that we are ensuring that children are getting good, solid, quality tier 1 instruction, but yet we have to recognize that there are children who fall at a tier 3 level who need additional layers of support. And that goes beyond that of a classroom teacher. Our support staffs are wonderful. We have our interventionists, our instructional coaches. All of these arenas come together as a team to educate children. And so if we could just get what is rightfully due, and that is adequate funding for public education, you could then see, I mean, in public education, though there are class size restrictions, we still have large class sizes. And when you get into smaller, more private, yeah, you can have those small classrooms. And we all know as educators that you give me a classroom with 10 children and I'll show you exactly all the great things that you can do. But when you have a class of 27 or 25, and then you start coupling that with many of those might have an IEP, many of those have an ILP, and many of those have ILPDs. And then in addition to that, there are traumas, unannounced traumas, there are behavioral issues that are compacted with what our teachers most definitely have to deal with. So I said all that to say, allow those public dollars to remain, but then also increase the public dollars such that our teachers can do what is rightfully so for our children.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Well, and then the last thing I wanted to bring up that one of our school board members brought up to me is that this might be happening on the federal level. Does anybody want to talk about that? And so no matter what we decide here in Tennessee, this might be coming down the pipe federally. Does anyone want to speak to that real quick? I mean, it's only hypothetical, so let's not spend too much time on it, but who I can't remember who brought that up.
I think Miss Sarah Leichty, I think earlier.
Yes, I just mentioned that they are playing with legislation at the federal level to make school choice or vouchers available throughout our country. And so regardless of what we might have in Tennessee or not have in Tennessee, federal legislation would override that. I just don't want, as a concerned citizenry, to let that fly under the radar. It's very similar to what the former education person, Betsy DeVos, tried to push through. Just keep in mind that it's being talked about and it's being supported. It's my understanding it's being supported by our president-elect. So just watch for that and be willing to reach out to your representatives and senators in our state about how that could impact Tennesseans.
And I do have to just say, y'all, SOCM is a nonpartisan organization. The school board is a nonpartisan organization. The county commission also is a nonpartisan organization, but it's Republicans who are promoting this. I can't think of any Democratic representatives or senators who support this. Okay, I'd say we open it up to the public. Would anyone like to ask a question of our panel? If so, I guess just unmute yourself and ask it, because it's hard for me to see everybody. No questions?
It sounds like all the questions have been answered.
Okay, go ahead, Philip. Oh.
I said, it just sounds like all the questions have been answered.
Okay. All right.
Well, can I make one more comment?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Let's.
Go ahead.
Bruce.
Oh, thank you. Just an observation. I mean, if nothing else, people in the public sector who aren't following this very closely need to be, because this is going to affect your tax rates at the local level. And as a county commissioner, this is putting us in a very difficult situation. And I commend our school board and our director for the wonderful work. I mean, there's no fat in our budget. We're using every penny as a community that values public education for what it's supposed to do. And I've been very proud of this. The whole county government, all of it, seems to me to be, since I moved here 4 years ago, this whole county government's doing a good job. And but if they start taking this money away to follow these students, it's gonna come down to some hard choices for the county commission and school board. And our teachers need support, and I'm just all in on this. And it's been made a partisan issue. It shouldn't be. And we need to think about our students and teachers first, and consider what it's going to do for even those who leave the system. We've heard and read all these stories about the underperformance of these private schools, and it's just not. It doesn't make sense, because it's been thrust into the partisan arena, and it's just. And what I'm afraid is, even if nothing comes from the federal level soon enough, they've got a supermajority in Nashville, and unless we have a humongous public outcry about this, it's going to pass. And I think we need to be prepared for how to deal with it on that level. when it comes, but I mean, I'm do everything I can to fight it, but we do need to be politically realistic about the thing. But we have a lot to fight for in Franklin County anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm
Can we move on? I'm sorry, I'm just
yes, go
we're
ahead.
running out
I'm
of
sorry.
time. Okay, we
I have a question, please. Lewis Rice here.
Okay. Well, we had one person with their hand raised. Ben Ayers, could you give your question real quick? Then we'll hear from Lewis, and then Liv is going to tell us some piggybacking on what Bruce said. We need to take action. Liv will at the very end will have some actions for us to do. So let's hear from Ben, and then Lewis, and then I'll hand it over to Liv. All right, Ben, what did you want to say? Ben is a music teacher in the Grundy County school system.
Hi. Real quick, in terms of the partisan thing, I think it's notable that Kentucky went 2-1 for Trump and 2-1 against vouchers. So, that's a pretty good indication. I think that it's at its heart, it's public good. It's not a matter of, you know, um, uh, whatever, Democrat, Republican. I guess I had a question for Liv, which is, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here because it sounds like this is about to be discussed, but what would you suggest for all of us to do to advocate for this and impact it since we can't vote on it? It's not something that's, that we can just vote on. What do you think are the most effective things that we as teachers or parents or school board members or whatever, what should we be doing to try to help?
Yeah, so we will get into that here in just a moment. But one thing that I will add is I really appreciate the conversation. You bringing up Kentucky and all of these folks on the call who this is a nonpartisan issue. And really what we know is that this is not a Republican versus Democrat problem. This is an up versus down problem. What we have seen, especially in this last election cycle, is there are a lot of out of state big money interests that have poured a lot of money into local and state elections. A lot of them are pushing this same voucher scheme in states across our country. So we do have the power when we come together. Some things that we're going to do together on this call is we're going to make calls and send emails. Those are the big things that we're going to do. But also, I saw some folks in the chat speak at your county commission meetings, speak at your school board meetings, ask for those resolutions if they haven't been passed, or just keep making it a public conversation, particularly if you live in a rural or small town community. That is especially important because that is where these schemes are being most targeted. So I'll leave it at that, and then we'll jump into action steps after the next question, but thanks for lifting that up. And I'll pass it to Lewis, who had a question.
Well, you touched on my question. I want to know, where is the money lobbying in support of the bill coming from? Specifically, who stands to benefit from this?
I have some answers, but our panelists might, so I'll leave it to them first, and then I've got some additional insight if it's helpful.
Why don't you just answer it, Liv, and then we can go straight into the action.
Sounds good. So to that answer, or to that question, this money, what we saw the Tennessee Lookout put out a research kind of article about where a lot of this money is coming from. Some of the top PACs, let me share my screen actually, and this will be easier. So some of the top PACs that we're seeing about where this money has come from is the School Freedom Fund, Americans for Prosperity, and American Federation for Children. As you can see, these groups together put $4.5 million into our primaries. Americans for Prosperity and American Federation for Children in particular. I live in MacMillan County, Etowah, Tennessee. I've got 4 stoplights in my town. Nobody is normally knocking doors in Etowah. Americans for Prosperity was trying to push vouchers where we barely have any private schools in my county. All of these groups are funded by billionaires like Jeffrey Yast, who's big tech billionaire from Pennsylvania, billionaire Betsy DeVos, billionaire Charles Koch, and the Koch Family Foundation. We also saw the Tennesseans for Student Success PAC, which is funded by Bill Gates, the Walton family, and the Bloomberg Foundation. These are the names that are going to come up across the country where you're seeing voucher schemes being pushed. Down here, you can see Tennessee is labeled as one of ALEC, which is a billionaire-backed think tank. We are on their 25 by 25 list to have universal school choice, and it's all across the country, and you can see particularly concentrated here in the South. So when we're thinking about who really wants vouchers, it's not ordinary Tennesseans. It's not the folks on this call or your neighbors, no matter how folks voted. This is coming from billionaire interests that have a lot to gain if we privatize our public schools, which is why it's so important that we come together and protect this public institution that serves every child, no matter where they come from or who they are, with some amazing educators that deserve to be paid way more than what they're paid now. Before I head into the action steps, I would love it if folks can come off mute and give like some shout outs or claps or something for this amazing panel of local leaders and educators who took their time on a snowy day to answer these questions. If y'all want to come off mute and hoot and holler, drop some love in the chat, whatever, give a good round of applause for our folks.
Yay!
All right.
And y'all, had we met in person like we were planning to do, I would have had donuts for everybody. And we had some postcards printed up that were already pre-addressed to our state senator, Janice Bowling, our state representative, Iris Rutter, both of whom were invited to this but had conflicts today, and to Governor Bill Lee. So the physical postcards are on my front porch, and they will be on Betty Fraley's front porch. If anybody wants to pick up a physical postcard and mail it to them, I've already sent mine. But please come to my porch in Swanee and pick one up, or to Betty Fraley's porch and pick one up. Betty won't have hers delivered because of the snow for a few more days, but we do have physical postcards that you can send. But Liv has some things that we can do outside of good old-fashioned paper postcards.
Helen, may I add something to that?
Yes.
The Retired Teachers Association has an ad in the Herald Chronicle, and it should have come out this week. And please note it. It's a quarter of a page ad. There is a QR code that you can use, and it takes you into an area where you can automatically send an email. There's scripted letters if you choose to do that. There's all kinds of ways that you can contact Senator Boland and Iris Rutter. So I would encourage people to use that.
So, well, speaking of contacting our representatives, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left together. And so even though we can't all be together and eating those wonderful donuts and sipping coffee while we write our postcards, we can make some calls and send emails together. So here's what we're going to do. For the next 5 minutes, I'm going to share my screen with some information. Let me get that up. This is having the grace with Zoom, all this back and forth. All right. Okay, so here's what we are going to do for the next 5 minutes together is we are going to make phone calls to our representatives. If you have never done this before, it's not as scary as it seems. And if you have done this before, you know it's not as scary as it seems. So what I'm going to drop a link in the chat that has got a Google document. Let me get that there. And this has a how to call your representative guide to tell them to vote no on House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1. So let me get that in. So if you will click that, it'll bring up the script and a little guide. At the bottom of the guide, you'll see some links on how to find your representative's phone number. It's okay if you don't have that memorized or on speed dial. That is normal. That's why we included that link. So you are going to find their phone number for your representative and your senator. And I'm going to ask you to call and leave them a voicemail. The legislative session starts on the 14th. And what we want to do is that as they're coming back into the office, we want to make sure that they have voicemails full of folks saying to vote no on House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1. So that's what you're going to do. First step, you're going to leave your voicemails. After you leave your voicemail, we've got a link at the bottom on sending an email. Stockham has a very easy to use action link where you can just put in your address and your name. If you want to edit the email, you can, and it'll send an email directly to your representative and your senator. We also want to flood their email inboxes as well. So I'm going to play some light jazz music for about 5 minutes while we do this. And then when you're done, I want you to drop it in the chat that you're finished. And I've got one more slide to share about something else that you can do after this call. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. All right. I see some folks already on the phone, so go ahead and make your calls and I'll play some light music in the background. All right. So as folks are continuing to make your calls, if you are still on the phone leaving your message, let my voice just kind of be in the background. We've got the numbers dropped in the chat. And also I've seen some folks asking if you can share that guide link. Yes, that needs to be like your walkaway action, is that you are going to share that link on your Facebook, text it to 5 friends, get together next time that you've got a group meeting with folks, make calls together as much as possible, as much as we can flood their phones and their email inboxes, the better. So now what are we going to do after we leave the Zoom call? We've had a wonderful hour together of learning about what this scam is, how it's going to impact your county, and we all want to do something about it. Last year, it was people power that stopped the voucher bill. Ordinary folks across the state went to their school board meetings and asked for resolutions, had in-district actions, Nashville actions, calls, lobbying, everything. And that is what stopped the bill. So we're going to continue that work this year through Public School Strong and SOCA. One of the things that you can do is that we have an organizational sign-on letter. We published a letter in the Tennessean that was signed by parents from across the state who are part of our Public School Strong campaign. And now we want to open that up to organizations across the state. So far, we've had 27 organizations that have signed on. These are faith groups, labor unions, community groups, church groups, all types of different people who maybe aren't education focused, but have this commitment to public funds remaining for our public schools. And so if you would like your organization to also sign on to this, you can share this letter, and I will drop the link in the chat. And so right now we aren't accepting political organizations, but if any like party organizations, but any other group can sign on to this letter. So if you're having a membership meeting or you can get in touch with your leadership to sign on, we would love to have your group share this with us. If at all possible, if you can get those signatures by the 17th, we want to release this to the media on the 18th. Additionally, so that's number one, is signing on to the letter. Next is you're going to spread the word. You're going to talk to your coworkers, your family members, your neighbors. Start with the people that you know and talk to them about things that you learned about today, how vouchers are going to impact kids and educators in your community, and how you believe public funds should remain for public schools. If you want to get a Public School Strong t-shirt like what you see in this photo and join this movement of folks across 28 counties in the state, we're hoping to get to all 95, of people who are engaging on a deep local level to transform and protect their public schools, you can join our next online orientation the evening of January 20th at 6 o'clock Central. This is on Zoom. It's about an hour and a half. We'll learn the basics of school organizing and how to do that starting at a school board level to connect for statewide impact. So I would love to see you on that call, and I would love to have you connected with the hundreds of folks from across the state who have already done the same over the last year. If you registered for this call through our Every Action link, you'll receive a follow-up email. If you did not register, if you just came in through our Facebook event, I'm going to drop another link in the chat for you that way we can send up this follow-up email to you. So if you click that link that I just put and you'll RSVP for this event, that'll let me know to send you a follow-up email. But we also have all of this information on our Facebook page that we'll be sharing out. Lastly, thank you so much for spending your snowy Saturday here. I'm really humbled by all of the amazing folks in your community who are committed to protecting public education. If you are inspired by the work that's happening and you're not yet a member of SOCM, I invite you to become a member. Membership only costs $20 a year. It's not required to be a part of the movement, but it does help sustain our 52-year legacy and hopefully many, many decades to come of transforming Tennessee into the place we know that it can be. And you can go to our website for more information. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. I think that concludes the call unless there's anything that we missed.
All right. And I will try and get the recording of this meeting out to whomever wants it. Just email me, hfstaple@yahoo.com. I'll gladly get you the recording. Okay?
Great. Bye, you all. Thanks for being here.